I want to just get started maybe by introducing a little bit where I'm from. I do have a colleague, Chinyere, with me, who's also a civil rights attorney. And we work right across the street from this building here. And probably one of you recognizes what it is? Yeah. What is it? It's a church. It is. It's the church where Martin Luther King Jr. started his career as a young preacher in Montgomery, Alabama, where we're based out of. And this is right out the window from where I work. And then just across the street from where I work is the Civil Rights Memorial Center. Have some of you been there? Yes. A few people. And this particular monument was made by Maya Lin. She's the one who also, let me make sure my mic is on too. Is it? Are we okay with sound?
We are, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Maya Lin is the one, some of you may know, who created the memorial in Washington, D.C. for the Vietnam War. And if you go there, you'll see that there's water going over this memorial that has names of different figures from the civil rights movement, early in the movement in particular. And there's a space at the end. You'll see you can run your fingers across the names of some of the martyrs of the civil rights movement. And towards the end, there's a space. And the space was meant to signify how much more we have yet to do in our struggle for civil rights. And it's in that space that we continue to find ourselves, including with respect to LGBT rights, and the work is not finished. You see the engraving there. We'll know when the work is finished when justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. And so that's hopefully what we're working for, and excited to be here with so many other activists and people who have a heart for the movement which continues. Today in particular, I'm going to talk about the topic of conversion therapy, which is something that I've really focused my life on for the last about 4 years, and even a bit before then. I'd like to make this open, so to the extent that anyone would like to ask questions during the presentation, that's okay. If someone starts to kind of dominate it other than me, I'm a little bit of a drama queen, and so I'm not going to take that kind of competition. but it's okay to have a question or to be somewhat interactive, as long as it's not one person sort of dominating the conversation apart from myself. And so feel free to do that. But when we're talking about conversion therapy, we're talking obviously, or maybe not so obviously, about modalities, quote unquote therapies, but therapy is too much of a dignified word for what happens to try to change someone's sexual orientation from heterosexual or from homosexual to heterosexual, not the other way around. And sometimes this involves transgender individuals as well, where they're going to some sort of a therapeutic modality with the idea that their trans identity, that there's something wrong with that, and they're going to somehow turn them into a nice non-trans person. And so that's what we're really talking about here. And I have a really personal interaction with conversion therapy. I come from a Mormon Latter-day Saint background. And so as a young person, after I finished a 2-year Mormon mission experience in Europe, in France and Luxembourg, then like many other stalwart Mormons, I went to Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah, pictured here. There's a bit of a green tinge, I apologize for that, but it sounds like there's not really anything we can do about the coloring. It's really a beautiful campus, actually, right there in Provo, Utah, not too far from Salt Lake City, where my ancestors came across with the pioneers and Brigham Young, where he decided that this was the place, and the Mormons set out their headquarters for now their international church. And so it was there, after being a missionary, that it was clear to me as a Mormon that I needed to get married to a woman, and I needed to follow the Mormon plan, and that all of this would somehow work out. And there came a moment of crisis, probably more than one moment of crisis, but in one of my moments of crisis, I saw an ad in the BYU school paper that said, if you suffer from same-sex attraction, call this number, we'll help you. So I was thinking, thank God there's somebody that's gonna be able to help me take care of this problem, because everything that I've tried so far, all of my life up until then, which was like 23, 24 years old, hasn't really worked. And so I need a new coping mechanism. And so the next thing that I knew, I was in this building, the Spencer W. Kimball Tower on BYU's campus in the basement. And they ran a conversion therapy group there. And it's ironic, well, not even ironic, but it's very fitting that the conversion therapy took place in this particular building, because if any of you are familiar with Mormonism at all, Spencer W. Kimball was one of their top leaders. They considered him a prophet, but he wrote a book that called The Miracle of Forgiveness. And as a young Mormon back in the day, this was really one of the few things that I had as a reference point of what homosexuality was all about. And in there he used words like perversion, perverts, that sort of thing to describe who I am. And as a young kid, I was reading this, and I think one of the really fascinating parts about conversion therapy is this intersection between religion and quote unquote science, or what they purport to be science, which actually isn't. And there's this like symbiotic relationship, because from my faith background and others, there's teachings obviously that many of you have been subjected to, that being gay, being homosexual, queer, whatever identity that you have is wrong, is against God's will. And then we have conversion therapy that marries with this and says, oh yeah, that's right. And by the way, we have this magic formula to help you to be able to follow this standard. And I think it's really self-reinforcing. And one of the motivations for me to be involved in this work over the last 4 years is to take off this one prop, the prop of conversion therapy, that says that yes, homosexuality is based on some sort of a disorder, it's a developmental disorder, and by treating that, we can make you into heterosexual. And I think that by taking that away, hopefully we continue to see some more progress in some of these religious systems that say, oh look, we're right, you just go and get yourself fixed. And it doesn't work that way, and I think that there's a growing awareness, hopefully, well, there's definitely a growing awareness throughout society, and hopefully also within some of these religious communities, that this is not something that should be endorsed. It can be very dangerous, and it's no good. So it was in that building at BYU that I first heard of this character, Joseph Nicolosi. He is one of the main leaders and proponents of conversion therapy that lives in California. And so I heard about these theories, and essentially he's saying that it's a developmental disorder, that somehow you can heal whatever went wrong as a child, and that you can become straight. Also, it was during this time that I came into contact with Evergreen. Evergreen was the Mormon affiliated conversion therapy group. And so I went to Evergreen, and they did things like basketball for people who were attracted to the same sex. And somehow this was going to help, kind of make you more heterosexual. And I remember my friend David, he was one of my buddies. He was one of my buddies at BYU, and like he would describe himself as not typically masculine at all. And so he would go out there on the basketball court and just do his thing. And he'd be making all the baskets and doing all the, really, it was really great. And then, the other guys are checking each other out. And definitely nobody's becoming more heterosexual, but it's kind of fun, it was a good time. But, it's these sort of things that are a little bit silly, but some of it is actually pernicious and can be quite harmful. One of the reasons why this is important and why the work is so important and has been is because it's really part of the strategy, or has been part of the now failed strategy of our opponents. Let me go back a little bit. Failed strategy of some of our opponents that if in fact, as the conversion therapists say, that our identity, who we are as queer people, if that's something you can fix by going to a doctor, then there's no reason to give us civil rights. There's no reason to give us any sort of a equal place at the table. And so they really pounded this hard. And I think that one of the things that is so insidious and evil about this is that they employed queer people to actually be the messengers. And so it wasn't too long ago that we convened for the first time a group of former leaders of the ex-gay movement in Montgomery, Alabama. We had probably about 13 or 14 of them, and they're some of the top people that started Exodus International, that were the very highest level spokespersons for this movement, and since then realized this isn't working. I'm seeing some of my friends die by suicide, that people eventually figure out that this is a dead end. And so they feel a lot of concern and also a wish to be able to help in the practice, and also to make amends for what they feel is the real harm caused by some of what they've done themselves in their advocacy and in their being proponents of conversion therapy. And so it was really an amazing experience to sit there with them, to see tears, and then, you know, remorse, and also really a wish to see this practice end that they had formerly been a part of. Another reason why it's harmful is that we've seen in our work at the Southern Poverty Law Center that includes tracking hate groups and also anti-LGBT hate groups, that this sort of doctrine, the conversion therapy doctrine, it really locks in with what they're saying, with their propaganda against us. And so, so it's all kind of like meshed together as, you know, these forces that are really out to harm us. And so that's one of the reasons why we really wanted to go after conversion therapy itself. And we know that, you know, it can be deadly. We know that we experience hate crimes in this country. They're not exactly very well tracked in places like Alabama where we're at. But you know, this sort of doctrine, this sort of propaganda against us, this idea that who we are is less than others, that we're somehow subhuman because all we need to do is go get fixed if we're not heterosexual. This like fits into, you know, kind of this overall bias against gay people that sometimes is taken to deadly levels. And it's horrendous too because it also involves parents in this. And so, you know, you see some of these titles and, you know, it's really ridiculous to like actually read some of these books by Joseph Nicolosi, Richard Cohen, and others. And I met this particular Richard Cohen. He's distinct from the president of the Southern Poverty Law Center. But this particular Richard Cohen, he's known as the King of Touch. And so when I first started an investigation into conversion therapy to try to figure out how we might bring a lawsuit, I went undercover somewhat to one of Richard Cohen's hug weekends. And it was incredible because you're in this like conference room, much smaller than this, in a hotel room near the Baltimore airport, close, not too far from DC, and there's like a group of people, and some of them are families with their young kids, like, you know, maybe he's like about 19 or 20. It's usually guys that come to these. And just the look in the eyes of these young kids that are there with their families, fully believing that by paying money to this quack, I'll stop with the expletives right there. You know, that they're going to like somehow help their child not be gay anymore. And it's so sad to like see this expectation and to experience that. And some of the modalities are just crazy. In the Preventing Homosexuality book, that's where Nicolosi says things like, well, if you think your son might be gay, he should be doing things like taking showers with his father in order to like observe his father's penis, in order to identify that he also has a penis, and therefore he's identifying with his father, and all of this will somehow prevent him from becoming homosexual. And it's just like they just like make this up, and it's just really ugly. They've also, as I'm sure many of you know, created pseudoscientific organizations called NARTH. This is one of the evil fruits of Dr. Nicolosi as well, and they purport that this is scientific, but actually when you look behind it at who's backing it, that it's not scientific, and they just, you know, they make this stuff up and they put it forth as science, and they're quoting each other and they're citing each other, and it's like this sort of weird house of mirrors where it's a little bit difficult to kind of unravel if you don't spend a lot of time, but that's what it is. I've deposed some of these people for the first time as part of the lawsuit that I'll talk about pretty quickly. Just maybe one more thing on the harm aspect of this. You know, some of these people that are wrapped up in this, you know, we've heard about the Kill the Gays bill in Uganda and these sorts of things. So some of these characters, you can really draw a line between these sort of activities in the world against our very lives and against the lives of our fellow queer people, that somehow, you know, because we're less than human, then they're calling for our deaths unless we like change. This came up in one of my earlier cases I'll just talk about for a few minutes. And how many of you are familiar with the Anoka Hennepin bullying case in Minnesota a few years ago? Does that ring a bell? Just for a couple of you. Yeah, so this is all kind of related. early when I'd first started working at the Southern Poverty Law Center, we got a call from a teacher, basically a mayday, saying, we are in crisis mode here. There are kids that are dying by suicide. There's this policy, it's the sexual orientation curriculum policy, and we later called it the GAG policy. And basically it was a district-wide policy that said, in this school district, we don't talk about gay people, we don't talk about trans people. It's an issue left for the churches, for the families. We don't touch it here. And in the meanwhile, there was a group that the Southern Poverty Law Center later designated a group called the Parents Action League. And so they're the ones pushing this policy of silence in the schools. And then also, instead of providing supportive resources to kids, they're funneling them into conversion therapy outfits and ministries that will try to change the sexual orientation of kids. And then in the meanwhile, all of this is kind of brewed into this hostile environment where kids are actually dying. And then other kids are facing hostilities in the schools every day. And so actually there were several kids that died. The National Center for Lesbian Rights, I see at least one of my friends there, partnered in us in this case to investigate the Anoka Hennepin School District and to figure out what we could do to help, because clearly they were in crisis. Clearly this hate group had gotten the upper hand in the school district, and something had to be done. It was amazing to spend a lot of time with parents and individuals who had lost their kids, and also to try to figure out what in the world we could do. And so what we did is we ended up finding 6 student plaintiffs and learning about their experiences and preparing a federal lawsuit along, as I said, with the National Center for Lesbian Rights. We got the Department of Justice involved, Department of Education, and what we were able to do was to defeat the GAG policy. They got rid of it. And then also to put in a 5-year consent decree with the Department of Justice and Education as being responsible to oversee really a program of reforming the school district to address the hostile environment and to make it a place that's more respectful for students. And it's the largest school district in Minnesota. It's never going to be perfect. It's implementing a consent decree like that is very difficult work, but we've made a lot of progress. And I'm certainly honored and proud of our students that we represented, and that Kyle here pictured, he was peed on, he was tormented like our other student plaintiffs, and he ended up being a really powerful advocate for change. The way that was connected with conversion therapy, again, is that this Parents Action League, that was one of their main pushes, is that kids should be going to conversion therapy instead of any sort of affirming resources. And even today, I was talking to Kyle when I was in Minnesota just a few weeks ago, and he was reporting that there's a billboard in this community, and that one of his close friends was saying, well, all you have to do is change your sexual orientation. And so even as we start to see conversion therapists go underground or becoming maybe less prevalent, some of this ideology, like just this idea of like, well, if you just try hard enough, you can make it work out, just try it, like this ideology is still so pervasive in our society, and that's also something that we and others in this work to end conversion therapy are concerned with, and try to use these sorts of cases and circumstances that come up, these stories of survival, to be able to make the change in people's minds as well as in the law. Let me go forward. Are there any kind of questions or anything? I haven't really taken a breath so far. So yes. Are you talking about the Anoka Hennepin case? And I'm also a little bit concerned because it seems like that I might be on a little bit of a timer here, so the slides are like getting ahead of me a little bit. Is that distracting to anyone else at this point? Okay, we're okay. All right. There are several causes of action in the bullying case. The main one was under Title IX, and so that prohibits sex discrimination in educational programs. And so kind of the way that it worked very briefly is that if you have a kid that's facing bullying or harassment in schools, it has to be relatively serious, usually more than once or something like that. And then there's some kind of reporting or awareness, the school knew about it, they should have known about it, and yet they didn't take any reasonable actions, then you start to have this sort of a Title IX claim. There's also equal protection claims in that case. And then there's also human rights law in Minnesota that we added on as well. And I think that those were the main causes of action. Yes?
The American Psychological Association has come out against conversion
Yes. Okay. I just want to take a breath for a second, so thanks for those questions. Yes?
So this was in Michelle Bachmann's home district?
It was indeed, yeah. And you know, it's again, like I talk about this like interface between like religious groups that are having anti-LGBT messaging and hostility and like real effects on kids. And we saw this very much in Anoka Hennepin, where there's like these kind of mega churches, and they are closely tied to even Bachmann's. Her husband runs a counseling center called Counseling Care now. And so, you know, the church, these particular churches, not that all churches are bad, obviously, but these particular churches that are very anti-LGBT, queer people into Bachmann and Associates counseling centers. And then we have the Parents Action League, and all of this is kind of all tied up in this really kind of deadly combination. Yeah. So let's go forward. So about 4 years ago now, I was sitting in a room at the Southern Poverty Law Center with a couple of different colleagues, and you know, we'd seen all of the problems associated with conversion therapy. We wanted to do about it. So we were sitting in a room saying, what are we going to do? How do we address this problem? And I don't know, what would you do if you were sitting in that room? What would be the first step? Any ideas? You don't have to, I'll just tell you. It's a little bit, yeah, so we wanted to start a campaign. I mean, exactly, and that's it. I mean, really what we needed was to identify people who had been through it, and we could build from there. And so what we decided to do was to start some public education, but a lot of this would really surround an effort to go into the communities and start community meetings. And so I and my colleague, Ashley Jackson at the time, we started going around the country to convene experts on conversion therapy, mental health professionals. We found survivors. We started to solicit stories through our website. And before we knew it, we'd been to a number of different places, really with the main purpose of finding potential plaintiffs for the first lawsuit. We wanted to bring the first lawsuit that put conversion therapy on trial. That was our goal. I mean, that was our kind of earlier goal, and our bigger goal was to end the practice overall, which is an ongoing goal even now. And so, so we started these community meetings around the country. And you know, it was kind of interesting because we found HEIM early on because we partnered with a few different people with our community meetings. We partnered with Truth Wins Out, and Wayne Besson gets a lot of credit as being really a pioneer in this area. I think he was one of the advocates speaking out against conversion therapy before any of the rest of us were. And he was kind of the lone voice for quite a while. And then eventually, you know, we're talking about kind of this movement that I think he gets a lot of credit, and probably some others, but he more than anyone else at the very, very beginning of starting kind of this movement and starting to raise awareness. And so we teamed up with Wayne Besson, we teamed up with some friends at Get Equal as well to start convening these community meetings, to bring people together, to collect stories, to raise awareness, to start some public education. And it's just like kind of the seed. It's just like getting out there and engaging with the community and seeing what happens. And Wayne led us to HEIM, who's pictured at the top of the banner there early on, but I hadn't really had a chance to talk to HEIM until a little bit after several of our community meetings. And like, here's one of the flyers that we were starting to put up. And this was back in 2011. So we're talking, I think, like late 2000, it could have been 2012. 2012, early 2012, late 2011. And it was amazing. We were starting to like really get some traction. There was a lot of interest in the community meetings. There was some press, and especially in sharing some of the stories of the survivors that we were connecting with. And one of the meetings that like really sticks out in my mind the most was in Atlanta, and it coincided with one of the last big conferences of Exodus International. And we didn't know it was one of the last ones, but we had the community meeting. Chaim Levin, who was, you'll see more of, and he was pictured in the slide before, was there. I met him for the first time. And it involved also a protest in front of this big conference in Atlanta by Exodus International. And the protest also involved Solidarity, but by the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, who I have a lot of affection for, sort of this activism that doesn't always have to be lawyers in courtrooms doing all of the work, but also, community members and individuals like the sisters who were there in force, and then others. And so I and Haim were there, and we were there kind of like engaging with some people as they were coming in and out of the conference, and there with our signs, and they were there in full regalia, and it was really a powerful moment. And what we didn't really realize when we were there protesting Exodus International is that not too long after we filed our lawsuit, which was a number of months after that, then Exodus International, the largest hub of conversion therapy, maybe in the world, but definitely in the world, that they would go away, that they'd shutter, that they'd stop their practice. Now, there is a spin-off of Exodus International, but it's not at the scale that it was before. And some of the leaders that I was talking about that came to Montgomery and also NCLR, they had done some earlier work to have a statement by some of these leaders that was put in the press that that some of them who had started, I lost my train of thought on that line, but some of them that had started Exodus International now saw it actually come to a close. And some of the more recent leaders of Exodus International, after it had closed, when we had the meeting and conversion, it's a little bit of a timeline, but they came to Montgomery after Exodus, but some of the leaders were pretty fresh out of Exodus by the time they had come, and that they had seen really how much harm and how bad that this was, and feel a lot of remorse now. And so we started collecting these stories, having community meetings, kind of seeing the movement, like kind of this budding movement that Wayne Besson started, more or less, kind of starting to gain a little bit of steam. We're getting some more stories. One of the people who wrote into us was this gentleman, Max Hirsch, and he was in Oregon. And what happened with Max was he went to a regular psychiatrist, and without any prompting by Max or even any warning, the psychiatrist started coming up with these weird theories. Well, maybe you're not gay. Have you thought about this? And so he was starting to practice a form of conversion therapy on Max. And Max had tried to put in some sort of a complaint. I think he might have sent it to the wrong place because he wasn't quite sure what to do. But we had this idea that hadn't really been done too much. Maybe it had been done once or twice to the King of Touch, for example, Richard Cohen. There was some sort of a complaint against him earlier than ours. But really, we created one of the first publicized complaints against this particular practitioner of conversion therapy. And basically what we did is we just argued, look, here are the ethical standards for your profession to be a psychiatrist, and by practicing this discredited form of conversion therapy, you're breaking all of these different ethical requirements, and so something needs to happen. So what we did is we submitted the complaint to the Oregon Psychiatric Association and also the American Psychiatric Association. And what happened was they investigated the situation, and there was a result of education, kind of education and censoring. And that's pretty much the level that Max wanted, because it was an older psychiatrist. Part of Max's worry was that he was just completely out of date in his training and had no idea what he was doing. So it's like he didn't want him to lose his license or like lose all of his livelihood, but he just wanted him to like get with the program a little bit. And so he was very satisfied that that's what happened with that particular modality. And so we're starting to kind of look at different modalities of challenging the practice. And like I said, what we were really going after was a lawsuit. We wanted to sue some conversion therapists and like really put it on trial and to shed a light. And so Haim, who I'd mentioned before, once I had a chance to chat with him at the rally in Atlanta, along with the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, I started listening to his story and thinking, this sounds like something that we could work with. And to hear Haim tell it, it's really harrowing. Are any of you familiar? Probably a couple of you are familiar with it, but not really. But Haim, he's from an Orthodox Jewish family, and he lives in Brooklyn. And he went to a school where they really didn't even teach him to write in English, because it's all in Hebrew, and it's all kind of religious studies. And so he'd never really hardly interacted with another person outside of his community in Brooklyn, Crown Heights. And so, he was about 18 years old and trying to figure out what the hell to do because he's gay. And so, he's funneled into this outfit called JONAH, Jews Offering New Alternatives to Homosexuality. They later changed their name to Jews Offering New Alternatives to Healing. I always make that slip. New Alternatives to Healing, but it's actually New Alternatives Anyway, something like that. But it should be New Alternatives to Healing. And so anyway, JONAH, they started engaging with Heim. He started going to weekly conversion therapy there in Jersey City, just across the river from New York City. And he had individual sessions with a man named Alan Downing, who comes from a Mormon background like me. And so one of the things that Alan did was, all of these kind of modalities based on the idea that Heim was gay because something went wrong as a kid. And in fact, Heim was brutally he was sexually abused as a kid, as many people experience sexual abuse, unfortunately. But they seized on that as an excuse of, well, this is the way that you're gay, and we're gonna help you to become heterosexual by addressing this and other issues. And after a while, Heim said, well, I don't think this is really working for me so much. I'm still feeling very gay, and it's like I've been doing this for like a year and a half, like a year plus, and it was like, when's things gonna start changing? And then Mr. Downing said, well, you just have to stick with it, and you have to be really committed to the process, and let's try this. And so he instructed Heim, he was 18 years at the time, to stand in front of a full-length mirror in a closed, locked office with Mr. Downing, and he instructed Heim to take off one article of clothing by article of clothing. And the way that he explained this is that, one of the reasons why you're gay is that you have body image issues, and so we need to deal with your body image issues. And so here's this man, Alan Downing, who has professed to being attracted to men, but he says, well, it's diminished over time, or maybe I don't really have it anymore, or this or that. But he spends all of his time as a conversion therapist with men, and often young, vulnerable men from insular communities. And so here he was having Heim do a striptease in front of him and saying, this article of clothing, this article of clothing. And then Heim protested after a while. He had his there, his shirt off, eventually more. And he protested saying, I don't want to do this, I'm uncomfortable. And this is somebody that's been subjected to abuse as a kid. And so Alan, I know you have to do the work, you have to be dedicated, this is what's required for you to do. And then before he knows it, Heim is completely naked within arm's length of this very large, I think he was like 240-pound man. And then Mr. Downing instructs Heim to seize his masculinity, to touch his butt. And there he is, just in this, it's the most harrowing thing. And so I'm hearing the story, and it's unbelievable. And then these other things, and I'm thinking, okay, well, something has to happen here. And so from Heim, I started talking to other people that were connected with this. And he led me to Ben Unger, who will be pictured in the next one. But before that, I want to get to Michael Ferguson. And it's really fascinating because Michael Ferguson, sometimes, I'm a person of faith, I'll just come out as that. But I'm definitely not traditionally Mormon, as you might guess. But once in a while, I like to go to church. And so when I was living in New York City, in my earlier job at a law firm in New York City, I just had a feeling I'm gonna go to church today. It had been years pretty much since I'd gone. And it was this congregation full of people. And the one person, and this is years before I met SPLC or thinking about a conversion therapy case or anything else like that. And so, so I run into Michael Ferguson. He's the one pictured there, and ended up being one of the named client in our lawsuit. And so in these community meetings I was talking about, we did some in Utah as well. And so I reconnected with Michael, and we'd been friendly and actually quite close in ways. And we're sort of talking about this. He said, oh yeah, Alan Downing? He was my therapist back when I was in New York in medical school. And I said, really? And so I start hearing Michael's story, and he'd actually been through similar exercises. He'd been to this Weekend in the Woods program I'll talk about more. And I thought, oh my gosh, you could be a plaintiff in my lawsuit. And so, so we started talking about this, and eventually he warmed up to it. And eventually he was the named plaintiff in the lawsuit. And just a little bit of a side note, since I have kind of some time for side notes. Michael at first, he was saying, I'm embarrassed about this, something I'm a really smart guy. And since then he got a PhD, not that you have to be smart, not that, anyway, but he ended up getting a PhD in neuroscience or something like that recently. And he's a really smart guy, but he just fell for this. And like, it's very difficult for him to account for that. And it's embarrassing for anybody. It's embarrassing for Haim to like stand up and say, yeah, like I was with this creepy guy, like he got me to like take off all my clothes and I fell for it. Like, you know, and they get up to like in front of like a national audience to talk about this. It's embarrassing. And so as lawyers and as advocates, we have to like figure out like how to kind of support our clients through this. And it can be very difficult, and we need partners in that work. But with Michael at first, he was saying, no, I'm too embarrassed, but I want to be a part of the lawsuit. I'll be John Doe, plaintiff. I'm not going to say anything. And so kind of over time, we like talked about that. And it's not that I tried to coerce him at all. I didn't. But we, you know, kind of looked at we weighed it, we thought it through, we gave it time, we, you know, sort of, and eventually he and Haim and others that we represented became really fierce advocates for the cause and really empowered. And I think that's something that I love the most about being in my line of work and being a civil rights lawyer and representing these individuals and others, the kids in Anoka and others, is to really see that process of them emerging from a place of horrendous abuse and being through, you know, these unspeakable circumstances, and then see them, you know, on CNN or talking to a New York Times writer or something like that, sharing their stories in a way that's very powerful and very compelling. And for me, that's like really an amazing moment to be an advocate and be a part of this movement and like see the change happening. And in fact, you know, this article was published the day that we filed the lawsuit, and it was the same day there was a light blanketing of snow over Jersey City in November. I took it as a good omen that all of this would work out well, although it wasn't assured. No one had tried this before. No one had ever sued conversion therapists under consumer fraud as we did, and we didn't know if it would actually work, but it seemed like that we, you know, the legal theories made sense, and we were piecing it together in a way that we really thought would work, or hoped would work, and then and then we file it. And you know, you kind of see this sort of reverberation almost, you know, from just the filing, the news of filing it. And it was soon after that, not that I take full credit for filing this lawsuit for all this happening, because we have partners in the work, National Center for Lesbian Rights, which I'll continue to give credit to for their advocacy as well, and others that I've mentioned already and should mention. But you know, we see Exodus shut down. I mentioned Evergreen International, the conversion therapy Mormon-affiliated organization that I was sucked into to agree at BYU. We see them shut down. You know, like, it's kind of interesting. You see these old patterns that are like there for years and years and years and decades, and you start to kind of push against it and start to challenge it and shine some light, and sometimes it starts to kind of melt, and you like see, wow, you know, we can actually like do things like see some effects and like see our work getting traction, and that's really exciting. Yes?
I wanted to, we saw the suicides in Minnesota because of bullying.
Mm-hmm.
Would you consider this also a form of bullying?
Totally, yeah.
And do you know whether any statistics exist as to the number of attempted suicides or the percentage of people who've been through this who have considered or attempted suicide?
No, I wish that data existed, but in a way it's impossible. And you know, we're running into this even now with suicide deaths among young and different aged Mormons. There's a lot of turmoil that continues in that community, as well as the Orthodox Jewish community, as well as other communities, that is at least linked to rejection and negative, hostile messages from the highest leadership. Most recently, along the lines of, you know, there's if you're not with the heterosexual program, then you know you're not with God's plan and you don't fit into it. So you know.
So there haven't been any studies per se.
That's a good question, and maybe somebody else knows. Actually, I'm gonna defer. But the problem with that, before we get another voice into this, that may know something helpful for the conversation. But the problem with that is, like, with the situation of like Mormon-related suicides, like often you'll see the obituary, and you know the families, they're not going to be like advertising, oh, and by the way, we sent our kid to conversion therapy, and by the way, it was gay, and it's not like, no, I mean, it's like, it's more polished than that. And we also found that in trying to figure out like how many people have died through JONAH. And like we'd hear stories of people that like, after they got married and they've been through JONAH, they got married to a woman and then like, they walked off the ledge of some high place and they died. But like, it's like, it's hard really to like really get to like, how can you ever figure out all the people this happened to? Because it is so secretive. And like even, that was one of the boundaries we had in our case, is that that they basically ask you to swear secrecy to go to these programs in terms of other people that are involved in it. And so I think it's really difficult, if not impossible, to figure out like kind of that kind of data.
Yeah, so I was gonna add, I think in terms of studies, the best corollary is the family rejection studies.
There you go.
Which just show that, higher levels of family rejection result in higher levels of short, long-term mental health consequences, higher engaging in higher risk behaviors, higher levels of suicidal ideation, and suicidal attempts. Sending your kid to conversion therapy, even though you may sort of be seeing yourself as doing it out of love, is in fact is family rejection. Right?
Exactly.
And so I don't know if it's necessarily connected to what JONAH did or what those conversion therapists did, but that sort of being put out there by your family like that
Right.
has a huge negative impact. And I think that's also another difficulty with sort of suicide cases from a legal perspective is causation.
Yeah.
Because they are being so highly rejected by their families, likely their community. And this is just one of, unfortunately, many factors.
Exactly. It's very well said. But there's one study among Mormons, for example. I think it's the largest sample. There was like 1,200 people that were sampled that are LGBT and Mormon, and a majority of them had gone through some sort of conversion therapy program. So it's very prevalent, especially among communities like that who are receiving negative messaging about what it means to be LGBT. I want to talk just a little bit more about some of my other clients in the case. You've met Haim, you've met Michael. Ben Unger I found him through Haim because the two of them, they did some advocacy before they were plaintiffs in our lawsuit with Truth Wins Out by making a YouTube video that you can still find online where they're sharing their stories. But one of the things that Ben in the middle, he endured and that was most hurtful to him was that his conversion therapist told him that a reason why he's gay is because he's too close to his mom. And for Jewish moms, they love their kids, they're good moms that are involved, and they're there. And so Ben was close to his mom, that's true. And he said, oh, well, this is it. And so at the advice of his conversion therapist, he stopped speaking to his mother, he blamed her for being gay. And you can imagine what this did to his relationship with his mom, what he did to him, and it was horrendous. And so one of the activities that they taught Ben to do was that he needed to beat a pillow with a tennis racket, and the pillow was to represent his mother. And so he's beating it, and there's people around him cheering him on, harder, beat, and like let it all out. So he's like supposed to like emote and get into this rage against his mother, who's the pillow, and he did it to a point where his hand started bleeding. And so, it's this sort of a practice that that is so incredibly harmful for relationships and also for the individual by really putting them in the state that is not therapeutic and it's certainly not helping them to become heterosexual. One of the things I'm really proud about this case is that it was under the Consumer Fraud Act in New Jersey. Other states have similar consumer protection laws, and one of the things you have to have in order to have a consumer fraud claim in New Jersey is that you have to have some sort of ascertainable loss. And what that means is usually it's the person who paid for it. And so we have these young Jewish guys, there's 3 of them were from Orthodox Jewish families, Michael was the Mormon, and some of them, their families paid. And so in order to have this LGBT rights case go forward, we needed some parents to be a part of it. And so we ended up having 2 moms, 2 Orthodox Jewish moms who continue to be active in their communities to be named plaintiffs in our lawsuit against conversion therapy. It was amazing. And so you see Jo Bruck, who's Sheldon's mother, and she was right there. She's a prominent part of a prominent Orthodox Jewish family in the Chicago area. And she was there to support her son. It was amazing to see her walk up to the stand. I got to cross-examine her in front of the jury and the press and to just hear her recount her story. And her story was essentially that, she loved her son. She wanted to help him. She didn't know where to turn. Within the Orthodox Jewish community, she did a little bit of research. She found this website by JONAH that said, "We have your answers." And so the next thing she knows, she's talking to Arthur Goldberg, who I'll introduce with his picture soon, who founded JONAH, and said, "Oh yeah, we understand what's going wrong with your kid. We can help him. You just have to, pay the fees to our counselors, and he should go to these weekend retreats, and we have all the answers." And it was a sales pitch of, and she was like, "Oh, that sounds really good. I'm really glad that I found you." And so she's paying for this, and we needed her to be a part of the case. Before introducing Chaim's mom, I'll mention Sheldon. Sheldon is, as I mentioned, Joe Bruck's son, and that was the day that he testified. And it was really spectacular to see Sheldon testify, because he has a lot of personality, and he wore some shoes that are tap shoes. And this was reminiscent of back when I was in the Air Force, because training instructors will wear these shoes when they're tap, 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 and they come up, and that way to like kind of get to attention, or like, watch out for whatever it is that they might want. And so he purposefully sat at the back of the courtroom and he was called to come up and testify. He tapped right up, sort of shante up, and then sat in the witness stand, and I was able to ask questions to elicit his story and what he'd been through. And there were a couple of times when he was just really letting out his anger, not in a way of like beating a pillow, but in a way to speak power against his oppressors and the people that had put him through this conversion therapy. And it was really spectacular for him to have that moment in court where he was able to share his story and to be a part of helping to shut down JONAH and to help with the broader movement that was taking more steam. It was after we filed our lawsuit that New Jersey, before that California, had introduced legislation to end conversion therapy, and then New Jersey was not that far after that, and that came after the news of our lawsuit. And so you kind of see how this movement, starting with Wayne, is like kind of building steam, and it's becoming more in the national press and even in the international press. And we see kind of other allies coming to the work, and it's really starting to take off. I wanted to have just a few words about Chaim's mother, Bella Levin. And again, she's from a kind of a staple family in Crown Heights and in Jersey City. And it wasn't at all assured to be able to get clients like Bella to be in an LGBT rights case that's really important for the movement to help end conversion therapy. But we kind of worked through Chaim, and then I had a few conversations with her, and I remember one on the phone where I'm speaking to her about what this might mean. And I just remember her saying, whatever must be done will be done. And so she was very dutiful, and like the other mother, Joe, she just loved her son. And that was the whole reason why she was paying for him to go to conversion therapy earlier on. She also believed in the lies of JONAH and just wanted to help her son. And so here's some of the defendants in the case. And so I was mentioning Alan Downing on the left earlier, who's the one that had the weekly sessions with our clients in Jersey City. And then in the middle is Arthur Goldberg next to Elaine Burke. And they're the founders of JONAH. And there's a lot of really sadness wrapped up in all of this. Both Arthur Goldberg and Elaine Burke both have gay sons. And both of them are still gay, even though their parents are out there trying to change everybody else's kids. And it's so sad. We were deposing before, some of you who aren't lawyers, maybe as well, but before you go to trial and have everybody on the witness stand, you're deposing people and figuring out what their testimony is and what the facts are. And so when we were deposing Elaine Burke about this, and we're asking about her son, and we asked her questions like, do you believe that the reason your son is gay is because you were a bad mother? We didn't ask it that way, it's more open-ended, but she completely believes it. She completely carries this to this day, that the whole reason that her son is gay is because of something she did bad as a mother. And it's so sad. And she's carried this on and turned it into something that's so terrible. Here's just the website of JONAH. And I want to just kind of go forward a little bit to get through some of these. Here's what we were really claiming in our lawsuit, because it's tricky. JONAH, they were saying that, look, we have freedom of religion, and most of our clients are from Jewish backgrounds. We're just trying to help them to live up to their religious beliefs. You can't touch us with this lawsuit. Just leave us alone. And let me go back in. This was another example of the slides getting ahead of me. No, go back. I think it's just if I tap it once too many times. And so these were the claims, and these were the things that we found evidence in the documents over and over again, that JONAH was saying homosexuality is a disease, it's a disorder. Look, you have this problem and we can help you. They were claiming specific success rates, like 2/3 essentially. They said like 1/3 of the people that come to us, they're gonna be completely heterosexual through the program. Another third, they're gonna be like mostly heterosexual, maybe some lingering problems, but they can manage it with the tools that we give them. Another third, it's not gonna really work for them, but usually those are the ones that just give up too soon. And when we got down to it, we're asking them questions under oath. It's like, okay, what's your basis for this? What studies have you done? Where are your numbers? Show us, we need proof. And they had no numbers. They didn't track any client success rates. It was all just like made up. This is called consumer fraud, when you're making representations about your product and there's no actual basis in reality for it. They also said a particular time frame. Arthur Goldberg would be on the phone with the mothers and others and say, oh yeah, well, 2 to 4 years usually are people that go through the program. They'll have changed their sexual orientation. And again, we're putting them under the spotlight of judicial processes, and they have to answer our questions. And it turns out that, like I said, they're not tracking success rates, they're not tracking their clients' results, and so they're just making the shit up. Exactly. And then they're saying it's based on science, and that was trickier because they brought in experts. They brought up Joseph Nicolosi. They brought in these NARTH, supposedly heavy hitters, and Chris Doyle, who's one of the biggest kind of loudmouths out there, still being a proponent of conversion therapy. And they bring all these people that are supposedly experts, and they're saying, look, we have all the research, we've done all this. And I was deposing James Phelan, who was the director of NARTH's quote-unquote scientific board, and he published this book. And so I was asking him about it, and he admitted under oath that he never looked at he never looked at like the validity of a study. He only looked at what it reported as the results. And most of the studies that he looked at were from like the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, including electroshock therapy, lobotomies, like these chemical castration, like all these horrendous things. And he was crediting, like they were reporting, oh yeah, well this, whoever it was that was writing the report back in the 50s, or 60s, oh yeah, this worked for such and such number. And he just took that at face value. This is not science. It's not scientific.